Okay, today for economics, we are going to talk about market structures and what they are and the different types of market structures and how we characterize these different market structures. Okay, so the first thing you need to understand is kind of how we figure out and how we identify market structures, the what, right? There are 4 types of market structures, and these are based on, number one, the number of firms that are in that market, the number of businesses that are in that market. The second thing, no, that's not my face there, is the ability for each firm to affect competition. So how much impact they have on the competition in the market. And then finally, the market share. So this is thinking more about the market power as another way we talk about this. It's the ability to control a price within the market. The ability for each firm, each individual kind of company to control a price within that market. Okay, so let's talk about the different types, and hopefully this will help kind of unpack those ideas a little bit more. So as I mentioned, there's 4 different market structures we're going to talk about. The first one is called perfect competition. Okay. In perfect competition, there are a large number of sellers. Each one of these individual sellers is too small to actually affect the market. They don't have any real market power, right? Because there's so many of them. So no matter what they do, nothing is really going to change in the market. No one really cares what you do. You're free to make any decisions that you want without worrying about how your competition is going to react because there are so many sellers. Another characteristic is that in the perfect competition market structure, the products are identical. There is no branding. There is no differentiation in the products being sold. Again, another way to say this is the products are non-differentiated. Okay, they are identical. They are exactly the same, regardless of which firm or business is producing and selling the particular product. The other component of perfect competition is perfect knowledge, right? So perfect knowledge means you know kind of everything that you need to know about the particular product in this market. Also, risk-taking, because of perfect knowledge, risk-taking is minimal because everyone knows all there is to know. All the firms, all the businesses in this market know all there is to know about it. And so there really isn't much risk because everybody knows everything. It's perfect knowledge. And then the final characteristic of perfect competition is that there are no barriers to entry. Okay, it's easy to come and go into the market. It's free entry and free exit. You can come if you want to and sell products. You can leave if you want to, and there's nothing that's going to stop you. This is also one of the reasons why there are so many firms and that large number of sellers that we talked about is because there are no barriers. There's nothing up in your way to enter into the market or to leave if you want to. Now, you might be thinking, hey, that doesn't sound like it exists, and you're right. That's pretty unrealistic. Perfect competition really doesn't exist. Some could argue that maybe the tea market or the coffee market might kind of be the closest thing we see to perfect competition. But the reality is that understanding what perfect competition is helpful because it's used as a measurement for levels of competition in real markets. Okay, so we kind of use this as the measuring tool because even though it doesn't really exist out in the world today. All right, so then let's talk about, now that we kind of talk about our measurement and like what a perfect market would look like, let's look at some examples of markets that actually exist. So the second market I want to talk about, the second market structure I want to talk about is monopolistic competition. So again, the characteristics, we do see a lot of producers. There's not as many in a perfect market, right? But there are a lot of producers in a monopolistic competition, and it's pretty easy to come into the market or leave the market, okay? There's pretty few barriers to entry and exit. One of the things that's a little bit different about monopolistic competition from perfect competition, one of the characteristics is that it's not identical products, but they are similar products. There is some differentiation, right? The products aren't exactly the same. There's 4 main types of differentiation. The first type is the physical differentiation. It might be the size of the product, the design, okay, the color or the shape or the performance or the features of the product. So think about smartphones, right? You can buy an iPhone, you can buy a smartphone from Samsung, so Apple, Samsung, there's other companies too. And while the features might be a little bit different, for the most part, a smartphone is a smartphone, okay? So there's little differentiation between them, and it might have to do with the design or the features or the interface, the user interface. But again, they're similar, all right? Another differentiation is the market. It could be the packaging of the market or the promotional techniques, right? How packaging can be a promotional technique, but something to promote the product. So Apple, for example, they have their packaging is literally it was designed to be a sensory experience. As that lid is slowly lifting off of the box, right? You can kind of feel it if you've ever opened an Apple product. It's designed to be a sensory experience. That's a differentiation between an Apple product versus other competition. Okay. Breakfast cereals are another example. Thinking about those promotional techniques, right? Breakfast cereals, there might be a toy inside, or on the back of the box, there's mazes you can do while you sit and eat your breakfast cereal. Okay. So those are promotional techniques that you see. Again, the products are pretty similar, whether you're buying Kellogg's or the store brand. Okay. It's going to taste pretty much the same, but the difference is in the promotional techniques. 2 other things I want to talk about differentiation. Number 1, skill of employees, or this could be levels of training. This could even be something like distinctive uniforms. Okay, and so this is another example of differentiation between these products. And then finally, the distribution. So how is the product getting to the market or to the consumer is really what it comes down to. So is it a mail order product? Is it an internet shopping experience? You have to go into the store in order to get that product. Again, you're getting kind of the same product, but how you're getting it is a little bit different. Okay. The level of training that the employees have to go through at that company might be different than this company. The product is the same. Okay, but the differentiation is the skill of the employees or the uniform that they have to wear or how the product is being distributed. All right, another thing that you need to understand about these similar products is that they are highly substitutable, right? Toothbrushes are a great example. It doesn't really matter which one of these toothbrushes you use, okay? They're all doing mostly the same thing. You might have one with a rubber grip by the thumb. You might have one with kind of a more bristles that are higher on the edges, or just but for the most part, they're doing the same thing. Restaurants are kind of another example, right? Restaurants are all competing for the same consumers, but they offer something unique in order to get the consumers through their doors. And so again, if you need to go out for dinner, you can go here or there. And let's say it's the same food. Okay. So if it's Italian restaurants, you're going to go to one or the other. They're competing for the same consumers, but it's the experience that's different. The product is pretty similar and highly substitutable. Okay. But there's some little things that are different. All right, another characteristic in monopolistic competition is that the firms have a small amount of market power. This is really based on differentiation because even if prices are raised a little bit, consumers are most likely still going to buy the product that they know. Okay, firms are able to make independent decisions about the prices for their products and their output, how much they produce. Okay, so they have a small amount of market power. Another characteristic of monopolistic competition is that knowledge is widely spread. It's not perfect competition. It's unlikely going to be perfect, I should say, due to things like patents, which are protections over designs, or maybe even copyright, protections over ideas. So while knowledge isn't perfect, it is pretty widely spread in monopolistic competition. All right, so moving on to our next market structure that I want to talk about. The next market structure, so we have perfect competition. Again, that's pretty unrealistic, but we use it as a measurement of competition in these other market structures. Then we have monopolistic competition, and now we are talking about oligopoly. It's kind of fun to say too, oligopoly. All right, so oligopoly is where you have a market with a few major producers, and each one of these has a lot of market power. Their decisions, one firm's decision, can affect the market in a big way. What one firm does affects everybody else. That also makes this very complicated. This particular market structure is very complicated because it's not just about looking at one firm, right? In a monopolistic competition, whatever one firm does, they don't have a lot of market power. It kind of doesn't affect the market. But in an oligopoly, whatever one firm does affects the market and affects their competition. All right. An oligopoly can be identified by really measuring or looking at the proportion of the total market share that's controlled. If there's a high concentration, if a lot of the market is being controlled by these few firms, then it's considered an oligopoly. Okay. The other thing that you need to understand about an oligopoly is that there's interdependence, right? The firms are interdependent upon one another. Again, they cannot act independently. Whatever firm B here, if firm B wants to drop prices, firm B is thinking, I wonder what my competitors are going to do. If I drop my prices, are they going to follow, or will they keep their prices high? What's going to happen? So they have to think about, because there's only a few other firms, they really have to think about what their competitors are going to do. And so there's interdependence for these different firms. All right. Another component or characteristic of an oligopoly is that there are high barriers to entry. And I'm going to talk about the barriers to entry for a little bit. Okay. Now, it's not impossible for a newbie up here to enter this market, but it is difficult. Okay. These incumbent firms, these three down here, these are the incumbent firms, the firms who are already there. All right. They can actually put up barriers to entry on purpose. They don't want newbie to come in. They don't want any more competition in this market. So they can put up barriers to entry on purpose. Now, before I talk about some artificial barriers to entry, it's important that you understand there are natural barriers to entry. Okay, so this could look like ownership or control over a key resource. All right, so if these firms already have ownership or they already have control over something that's necessary to produce a product in a market, that's a natural barrier to entry. Also, high setup costs can be a natural barrier to entry. So think about the automobile industry. Newbie here, who's Joe Schmo off the street, can't just come in and start building cars. It takes a lot of money to start building a car company, right? And so that's a natural barrier to entry, the high setup costs. The other high cost we see is high research and development costs. So this includes markets like the pharmaceutical market or the chemical industry, right? That's a lot of research and development. And so again, that's going to be a natural barrier to entry. That's not something that these incumbent firms have set up. That just exists in that market naturally. However, there are artificial barriers to entry. So one of them is predatory pricing, okay? So this is where the incumbent firms literally prey on the newbie here. They decide as a group to all drop their prices. They deliberately drop prices in order to force that rival, newbie here, or let's say that's another incumbent firm that these three have all joined together and decided, you know what, we don't like that person anymore. We want them out. Okay. And so they all drop their prices, which is going to draw competition away from newbie here because their prices are going to be lower. And so that's going to force this firm out of the market. Okay. Predatory pricing is an artificial barrier to entry. This doesn't exist naturally. This is something they decided to do. Another artificial barrier to entry is superior knowledge, right? These incumbent firms know more about the market because they've already been there. They've been doing this for a long time, and they're not willing to share their knowledge with newbie up here. Another artificial barrier to entry that we see happen in the market is acquisition. This can happen in two ways. One way can be where firm C here decides that they want newbie out of the market, and so they can take over the potential rival here by buying shares of newbie's company when newbie goes public, right? Firm C can start to buy up shares of stock in that company, eventually buying enough to have a controlling interest in newbie's firm. So if they own 51% or more of the shares, when newbie's firm has a stock, oh shoot, dang, I just lost my train of thought. I was going to say stockbroker, but that's not the word. If you own stock, you're a shareholder. When newbie here has a shareholders meeting, firm C owns more than half of the shares. Therefore, firm C is now a controlling interest party, and they have their ability to have more votes about what's going to happen with the company. So that's one way where you become a controlling interest, or you own more shares of the company. The second way is just an overall buyout, right? Just a complete buyout where firm C is like, hey, I don't want you here anymore. I'm going to offer you $4 million for your business and you can just walk away. Okay, so that's a complete buyout. And so these are both examples of acquisition. Another artificial barrier to entry is advertising. These three incumbent firms are more likely to have more money because they've been there. And so as a result, they can use that money for advertising. They can advertise for their brand. Their product is also going to be more noticeable, right? It's been around longer. Our newbie company here doesn't have a chance when everybody already knows the branding of these incumbent firms. And then the last artificial barrier to entry is these different kind of schemes or ways that these incumbent firms can act. So loyalty club cards are examples of an artificial barrier to entry, trying to keep consumers coming back. Even if newbie here maybe has better prices, I'm getting benefits by being loyal to firm A, okay, shopping with firm A. You also have exclusive contracts, you have patents, and you have licenses. These incumbent firms are all more likely to have those already in place, right? They favor existing firms because they are already there. These firms may already have contracts between retailers, between suppliers and buyers for that matter, right? And so it can be much harder for newbie to come in and enter into this market. All right, but there are some advantages to an oligopoly, okay? For number one, it can be highly competitive between these incumbent firms, which leads to lower prices for consumers. It also can really be efficient in terms of innovation and new products and process development. If there's a lot of competition among the firms that exist, then there's also most likely going to be a lot of innovation among the firms. It also can contribute to price stability. All right. Price stability really helps consumers plan ahead and stabilize their expenditures, which leads to a stable economy. So if this is an economic goal of a community, then oligopoly is not in and of itself all bad. There are some serious advantages to a market structures, to an oligopoly market structure. There are also clearly disadvantages, right? You have lower consumer choice when there are fewer firms in a market. Also, cartels can form and they can reduce competition. So these three incumbent firms can decide to work together, right? Become a cartel. They can do things like set prices. So they can say all three of us are going to sell our product for $10 a unit, period. Right? They can also set production rates. While they might be able to produce 500 units a day, they may get together and say, look, we're only going to produce 100 units per day in order to set the market. This also affects price. This affects supply, right? Which will then impact the market in a big way. So we do see these cartels that can form, which is a disadvantage to the consumers. And then also, as we mentioned, those deliberate artificial barriers to entry. So it doesn't allow as many firms to enter into the market, which again, can be a serious disadvantage. All right, now our last firm or market structure that I'm going to talk about is monopoly. So monopoly is where you have one producer in the market. The technical definition is when one firm controls 25% of the market. So that's how we determine whether or not a firm is a monopoly in any given market, is if they're able to control 25% of the market. They really do, a monopoly really does have complete market power. However, it is within what people are willing to pay, right? They can decide that, a particular company can decide that they want to charge $3,000 per unit, whatever their product is. But if the consumers are not willing to pay that, then they're going to have to drop their price, even if they're the only one producing that particular product. Okay, so they have complete market power-ish, right? It's really within what people are willing to pay. Now, how monopolies form, there's a couple of different ways that we see monopolies form. It could be that the firm has exclusive ownership over a scarce resource. So Microsoft is a great example of this with the Windows operating system, right? When Windows first came out, Microsoft owned it. They were the only ones with anything like that. And so Microsoft became a monopoly as a result of owning Windows, as a result of owning this operating system, how users interfaced with the computer, most of the public, right? Now, if you're a super computer science person and you can, like my daughter can not use Windows operating system because she can do all the magic, then that's different. But I'm talking about the general population. Another way that they can form is the government can actually grant monopoly status. This is often done with things like public utilities. So here in California, PG&E is an example, right? They're the only power and gas and electricity company here because they've been granted that status by the government. Professional sports teams are another example of these legal monopolies. They've formed legally. They've been given the permission to be a monopoly. So you have one baseball team, one basketball team, one football team, right, per kind of area. That helps build loyalty and gets fans there and all the things. But the government has given them the right to be there and to do that. Another thing that produces a monopoly is if producers have patents or copyrights, okay? So a patent is a protection over a design. A copyright is a protection over characters, ideas, images, sounds, names, things like that, all right? What those do is they protect the creator or the designer of that particular object, all right? And so then that person or that company then owns that idea, that character, or that design. All right, so again, this is a legal monopoly, and this is why we see them form. And then finally, we see monopolies form with the merger of two or more firms. This is the one that we see it's really closely regulated by the government. All right, some characteristics of a monopoly now. In a monopoly, there is no competition, right? Because there's just really the one firm or a one firm controlling so much of the market that there really is no competition in monopoly. Also, in a monopoly market structure, the firm has a unique product and there is no substitute for that product. So again, thinking back to Microsoft, they had Internet Explorer when kind of the internet first came out, and there really wasn't any other competition for a while. Obviously there is now. All right, but at the time, there's no other substitute. If you wanted to access the internet, you needed to use Windows and you needed to use Internet Explorer. Now, there are some advantages to a monopoly. Natural monopolies can avoid wasteful duplication of infrastructure, right? So we don't see power lines duplicated all over the place because PG&E is the only company that has access or has the right to produce power for the people in our area. All right, and so it avoids wasteful duplication of the infrastructure. Also, this really can lead to technological progress. Because monopolies often, not always, but often have high profits, they can actually invest in research and development, right? The firms need this dominant position in order to bear the risk that's associated with innovation, that's associated with the time and the energy that it takes to do research and development, all right? And so a monopoly having the high profit can take a risk and take the time to invest in research and development and innovation. Some disadvantages. Obviously, there's potential negative effects on the consumer, right? Monopolies can charge higher prices. And if, again, whatever consumers are willing to pay, but you might lose a lot of the market if it gets so high, okay? It also restricts consumer choice, and ultimately it really reduces consumer sovereignty. Sovereignty is like the consumer isn't ruling or reigning anymore. In a monopoly, it's really a lot more about the firm or the product. It's less about consumer choice or even, again, consumer sovereignty. Now, some of the ways that we've addressed this or fixed this or remedies this, ways that we deal with monopolies, is through government intervention. So a couple of ways that the governments have intervened, or our government has intervened to address the situation with monopoly market structures, is through price controls. Okay, so the government will actually set prices and then monitor profits of different corporations to make sure that that it's not harmful to the consumer. Also, the government can prohibit or block mergers of companies, and if they're afraid that a monopoly will form. They can also force firms to unbundle their products and open up the infrastructure. So bundling is when you're selling all your products together. So Microsoft did this, right? With PowerPoint, Word, Excel, and Access, they bundled them all. And if you wanted one of them, you had to buy all four. Well, the government eventually forced them to unbundle. And so now you can buy those individual programs. We also see, right, going back to good old Teddy Roosevelt here, hopefully you knew that was coming, right? The government also breaks up monopolies. Okay, trust busting, right? TR was called the trust buster. He broke up the bad monopolies that were harmful to the consumers. So a modern example of this is, again, I keep coming back to Microsoft, forcing Microsoft to split up into two companies now. So now you have one company for operating systems, Windows, and you have a separate company for software sales. Okay, so Microsoft had to end up splitting up into two companies. That was a result of controlling too much of the market. And then another remedy that we see is ultimately what we call, it's a lot of times we refer to this as nationalize something, where you bring the monopoly under public control or really under government control. This was really common in Latin America in the 1980s. You saw this when governments would monopolize oil fields, right? So rather than having private businesses controlling them, the government would take over these different things. So this image kind of represents a summary or a review of what we just talked about. I also put this image in your note-taking guide, so you don't need to worry about snapping a picture of this or anything. But again, it's a spectrum. Okay, when we talk about market structures, it's on this spectrum. We've got perfect competition on one side and monopoly on the other. And we figure out kind of where the markets are based on the amount of competition, if there's more competition or less competition, as well as the concentration of the market. Okay, and so again, more competition and less concentration of the market, that's going to be our perfect competition. That's what we measure things against. And on the opposite end is monopoly, where there's less competition and more concentration in the market. So I hope you learned a lot and enjoyed the lecture today. If you have any questions, feel free to come to my office hours or email me. Don't forget to get those structured notes done. Hope you have a great day, and I'll see you soon.